The year before, Tet was right there. That's where it happened, right by where we were. And so they were going to pull out before Tet, get rid of all the helicopters, bring all the men out of there. And I was put on the squad that was going to be left behind. There's like 12 of us that were going to protect an entire base. The night of Tet, I thought, I'm never going to make this. This is not going to happen. My name is Larry Winters. I grew up in Newpaltz, New York, which is a small college town about 70 miles north of New York City. I was born in 1948. My parents moved to a house that had no electricity, no running water, no bathroom.
Oh my gosh.
When I was 3 years old, and the rest of my childhood was repairing and fixing that project with my father. So I grew up in the woods outside of Newpaltz.
Was your dad military?
He was in the military, although he didn't go overseas, but he was in during World War II. He was in the Navy. He worked on aircraft. He was an aircraft electrician. That's what Dad did. Don Winters.
What was the lead up to you ending up in Vietnam? What's that story?
The lead up is probably my father, which is what you asked me about. He and I, eventually, there were 3 other children that were born. So he raised, and my mother raised 3 children or 4 children in a house that needed to continually to be reworked and bedrooms made and plumbing put in, so on. So that was the early part of my life. And I became his right-hand man because I was the oldest. And so essentially I felt like, I was lugging rocks. I was digging holes. I was doing that for most of my childhood while all my buddies are playing baseball and doing whatever they're doing. But it wasn't, and so it was a difficult working childhood. And when I became a teenager, that turned into me acting out in some ways and him having to punish me. And eventually I just figured I need to get out of here. And I didn't even tell my parents. I'd been signed up with a good friend. And 3 of us joined the Marines together and just decided that the only insight we had is that we weren't going to sign up to be in the infantry. So I signed up for 4 years to get trained I had ended up in helicopters, but the air wing, the military air wing in the Marines. And so
What year was that, Larry, that you signed up?
I joined in 1967.
Yeah, just before things really heated up over there in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So, what happened when your parents found out you'd signed up?
Oh, they couldn't do anything about it. I was just graduating high school, and I had already moved out of the house. The story goes, I didn't have a driver's license, but I was asked to take care of the neighbors' animals when they went away. And I had the keys to their car, and I went and picked up my friend who had to get work at Mohonk. And in Newpaltz and Mohonk, I had to drive up the mountain. And they had just graveled the road, and I went off the road and crashed the car. And my father's and knew the neighbor, obviously. And they worked it out that I would have to pay for the car. And they wouldn't be calling the police. And so I bought this neighbor his new car.
Wow.
And I was pissed at my father for not doing something other than that. And so I moved out of the house at 16. And I had a neighbor down the road about a mile. And he and I built a cabin behind his house, literally built a cabin with posts. We cut trees down, got lumber from the house that was being built next door that was in the scrap pile, and we built ourselves a place to live. So for the last 2 years of my high school, I was out of my house. I left it. I had a job at a dairy bar. I made enough money to eat, and I had a place to sleep. So
Wow.
when I signed up, they were surprised because I hadn't been around I mean, it was only a half a mile away, my house. So once in a while, I'd show up there and talk to my mother. But
Were you 17 or 18 when you went in and signed up?
I was 19, actually.
19.
Yeah. I had a learning disability, and I stayed back in fourth grade. So I was a year behind the class I should have graduated.
After you signed up, how long before you ended up in basic training?
I signed up at high school graduate. I did graduate from high school, but I'd already signed up. So I went in October of 1967.
Where did you go?
Parris Island.
Tell me about that.
I went with my best friend. We signed up together. And so when we got there, it was, of course, when the door opened on Parris Island, and some guy gets in the bus screaming his head off at us to get the fuck out of the bus. And we get out of the bus and get your feet on the yellow footprints. That was the beginning of the surprise that I had, because no one ever told me about that this was the process that you enter. So I was pretty naive about what I thought the Marines were about. I figured it was an instant man. I needed to man up to my father, who was a physically abusive, difficult man to deal with. He used to beat the hell out of me when I was younger. And I figured I need to get out of here, and I need to be able to get strong enough that isn't going to happen anymore. And it worked. In some way, it worked. But the first thing I remember is we're in barracks, and not a barracks, but an open space where we came off the yellow footprints. We were led into a building, and we're all standing there, and they said, take all the things out of your pockets, all the jackknives, anything you've got, get it out of your pockets. And so everybody's pulling all kinds of shit out of their pockets. And most of these guys are from New York City, because I live just north of New York City. So you've got a lot of city guys that have all kinds of things in their pockets. And I'm standing there, and a guy next to me falls down and starts vomiting. And he's laying on the floor in his own vomit. And the drill instructor comes over and puts his foot on his chest. And he says, take off your fucking shirt and clean that mess up. I said, whoa.
No pity in there, huh?
There wasn't much pity. So it was a difficult. I was physically in good shape. I was on the track team. I worked my butt off in my home. I worked in apple orchards and farms. So I was probably as in good a shape as I could be, and I was able to do most of what was, that they pushed to the limit. Whatever you could do, and if you needed to do more, they would make sure you did more until you collapsed. And it was a psychic collapse as well as a physical collapse that was interesting to me, because it took about most of boot camp for me to figure out I was being brainwashed. And many of these messages were coming through my body, being completely exhausted and being confronted by circumstances where I had to make decisions. And there were things like blanket parties. And blanket party was when somebody wasn't doing their exercises properly, and the DI would say, I want you 3 guys to take care of this cat tonight. Bring him in the head and make sure that he's going to be able to do the push-ups tomorrow. So people put soap in a sock and take this guy in there and beat on him until he's going to do the push-ups that he needs to do the next day. And there was a number of things that went on like that throughout the whole boot camp. And this is all being told to you. You need to learn how to handle these kinds of things, because you're going to be going to war. Every one of you is going to Vietnam. And the DI used to sit there in the middle of the squad bay at night, and particularly the senior DI, who was the highest ranking of the 4 DIs we had. And he tells stories about the men he lost in Vietnam. And at times he's brought to tears telling these stories. And then he calls one of his other DIs in to humiliate.
What was going through your head midway through being in boot camp?
Well, there's a couple of points in boot camp that were turning points. One was one of these young DIs who I don't think was as old as me. You're not allowed to say the word you. So try to extradite that from your conversation with anybody. Take out you. So you never say, you asked me to do this. You told me to do that, whatever it is. And so I said, you to this DI. And he says, all right, bring me the you sauce. He takes a bottle of hot sauce. He makes me tip my head back and he starts putting it down my throat. And he chips my front tooth. And in that moment, I'm looking at this guy who's my age and I'm looking at his neck and I'm thinking, if he pushes me another second, I'm going to kill him. So I don't know if he was trying to get me there, but he got me there. And it was the closest thing. And I knew that I would do it because I didn't care what happened to me in trying to do that. And so that was when something broke inside of me at that point. There's another time when the grandfather, DI, the old guy, we're headed to the rifle range and we're carrying our rifles. And they put us through maneuvers all the time. And they had just put us through a whole bunch of little rifle exercises where you port arms, so on, all this stuff. And he walks by me and he sees that my safety was off my rifle. And he says to me, come over here and sit down on that thing. And he comes over and he has me come over and sit next to him. He says, open the chamber on your M14. We were using M14s and they's old rifles. And he says, okay, now stick your thumb in that chamber. What he's doing. He says, okay, now release the bolt. And it smashes in on my thumb. He says, now stand up and walk around with it. And I'm in severe pain. It's hanging off my fingernail. And I'm walking around. He says, now sing the Marine Corps hymn. So I'm walking around, not knowing if I can possibly take it in another second, singing the Marine Corps hymn. And all the other Marines begin to sing the hymn with me. So the whole platoon joins the song. And that was such a confusing moment. It was there was elation in it that they joined. They were supporting me, I thought. And at the same time, how can somebody do this to me? And did that help me keep the rifle safety on? It probably did. So there's a confusion about it. You know, they say we're doing this to make sure you stay alive, because where you're going, you're likely.
Did you at any time, did you go, man, I've made a mistake being in here, or were you embracing it? Did you feel like?
I thought I screwed up, that I didn't, but I wasn't willing to leave. I was frightened that if I left, then there would be, I don't know what I would do. I think I wasn't oriented enough as a man to make a decision to do something. But later on, before I got to Vietnam, I was pretty close to leaving. I attempted to go AWOL at one point in Hawaii, but that we'll get to that later.
We'll get to that. So tell me how boot camp ended then for you.
Well, I got through it, and I was delighted to be able to get out of it and come home. And I suppose I felt proud that I was able to manage doing it, and that I was a Marine. I yet didn't know what it was to become a man. I thought I was becoming a man, but I didn't realize that that's the rest of my life, that project.
Did your father, your relationship, had it changed during the time you were a Marine at this point?
I think it changed in me because I wasn't prepared to take anything from him at that point, and he didn't offer anything.
Probably sensed that.
I think he probably did, because he came to boot camp with my mother. They saw what the place looked like. And I think he probably had an insight as to what I'd gone through. And I think doing it without his permission probably also woke him up that he's not going to tell me anything that I'm going to do. In fact, I'll probably go in the opposite direction.
He probably knew he probably knew what your motivation was, I'll bet.
Yeah.
And it was related to him.
I did write a book about the making and unmaking of a Marine. And in that book, I was finally aware that my father had a tough childhood. And this wasn't, it came out of something that was very difficult for him. His mother committed suicide. His own father lost both his legs, and it was a train worker and got stuck between two trains connecting and lost both of his legs. And my father was just a kid. And so he had to take care of his own father with no legs. And his mother just decided that she wanted to leave. And she did it in a dramatic way. So, it took a long time to have some understanding and become a therapist, which is what I did. To have an understanding about why this was going on in my family. And now I could have compassion for him and understand what he struggled.
Okay, you come home. Then what happens after that?
The next thing that happens is I go on leave. I have a girlfriend. My girlfriend is my high school girlfriend. I connect with her. I spend more time with her than my family. And then I'm go to ITR, which is basically infantry training down in South Carolina. And I go through that process, which is it's just another level of boot camp. But you learn how to shoot weapons. You learn how to kill people. You learn how to use compasses. You get a little bit of free time, but not much, to begin to talk to people and figure out, because in boot camp, you can't talk to anybody. You're silent the whole time. If they see you talking to somebody, you are going to pay. So there's no dialogue that's going on. People aren't telling you anything about their lives. They're not telling you about how they feel about things. They're not doing shit. And in ITR, you start to talk to people and you start to look at who joined and who didn't join. There were things going on at that time in the barracks. We lived in barracks. So there's like 70, 80 men in a one building, all on the same floor, bunk to bunk. And that I can remember two guys that were sniffing shoe polish, spray shoe polish to get high. And then these were two very powerful men, and then run down full speed and run right into the wall in front of 100 men that are all watching this take place. So there were outrageous things that were occasionally happening that I didn't expect it to see things
At
like
this point, are you still with your friend? Is he still with you that you signed
still
up
is.
with?
Yeah, he's still with me. He doesn't depart from being with me until after we get to Vietnam, and they break up the squadron. And I was,
So what else happened there at infantry training?
in
Was
training.
it fun? Did you enjoy it? I mean, shooting the guns and stuff, or?
Well, I was able to go into a mess hall. I was able to go into the store because there was a store on base. And I was able to go off base once in a while. So that was nice. But it was still, we did forced marches. So you go on a 10-mile forced march. And in the forced march, if anybody can't make it, you're responsible for making sure that person makes it, whether you carry them. Some way you've got to make sure that everybody makes it. And then they humiliate the guy that couldn't make it, but you got to make sure he got there. And so there were lessons like that to be learned. We slept outside. We did extreme things to prepare us for basically war, which is the extreme. You're likely to run into these things. But there was a lot less lecturing about from the staff was not trained drill instructors. They were trained guys that just pushed your limits, or if they were experts in how to use an M79, you learned how to use that. And they told you, how to, and you were using live ammunition.
Are you hearing things about Vietnam at this point? Are they telling stories, or is that kind of out of the picture?
That didn't get there yet. No, none of these people that were training us were talking about Vietnam. That happened later when I got through all of that.
Any other stories from infantry training?
No, I got out of there and came back home and had 30 days leave, and I basically hung out with my girlfriend the whole time, who eventually became my wife.
Wow. That's its own story, it sounds like. So, okay, so what happened then after that?
I went back and I went into New River, North Carolina, which there was a uh, South Carolina. There was a helicopter squadron that I joined. So I got put into a helicopter squadron. It's 361 helicopter squadron, 53 helicopters. They're the large cargo moving helicopters. And I was in that squadron. And so I had to use the skills. Well, wait a minute. That's not what I did next. That's what I did after next. I went to Memphis, Tennessee to train to be able to work in that helicopter squadron when I mentioned. So in Memphis, I was there when Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis. I was put in training to do riot squad. So we had other Marines kicking and spitting at us with shields so we could go in when they called us for the Martin Luther King event. We never got called, but I was expecting that was going to be what I did from there. But in that place, I learned how to do metalsmithing, which was my MOS. I learned to become a metalsmith. And my best friend was in class with me. He did not do well on the final test. I did pretty well. So I had a choice where I wanted to go in the United States. There was a number of places I could have gone. Probably I would have gone to California. He didn't have any choices. so, so he got the last thing on the list, which was New River, where we went. So the good thing about it was 8 hours from home. So if we got on Liberty and we could go home on the weekend and be home for 5 minutes and turn around and go. But that's where we went, to this squadron. And I was on learning how to repair helicopters, being on guard duty, waiting to see what would happen. And eventually that squadron was enlisted to go to Vietnam, the whole squad.
Describe that helicopter. What number is it? And tell me a little bit about it.
It's a 53. It's a Sikorsky helicopter, CH-53. And it's a helicopter that can carry 30 troops. It can lift a bulldozer. It's the most powerful machine they had to move things. So on all of the LZs in Vietnam, they needed lots of stuff brought in, and we would bring in huge amounts of stuff and land on the top of it, or not land and just unload it, lower it down and unload it if we couldn't land it.
When they're training you to repair it, are you qualified, or at least learn a little bit about fixing the whole thing, or do they just specialize you in one part of it?
Metalsmithing is a specialized area, and there's particular things that have to do with the structure of the aircraft, some of the hydraulics. It's pretty focused. So, it is a skill you could use later on if you wanted to work in that field. But it's not a very large area. It's mostly fixing bullet holes and learning how to adjust rotor blades and stuff like that.
Did you enjoy the challenge of that at the time?
It didn't mean much to me. I'd already knew how to do quite a lot of building. I grew up making things. So it wasn't bad. And it was fairly easy for me to do what they were asking. I mean, I never fixed a helicopter. But
Yeah.
we painted the Marines on the side of the helicopter, or we got rid of the Marines and made it camouflage. So,
how long were you there? And then did you ship out from there to Vietnam?
I shipped out from there to Vietnam. I was probably there a year. Yeah. I got to Vietnam in 1969. So
How did you get over to Vietnam? Tell me that story.
I got to Vietnam by being flown to San Diego, and the helicopters were delivered. I didn't fly in a helicopter. I flew on a jet plane to get there. They shipped most of us not by helicopter. So the squadron wound up there, and we went off on a ship. The HMH New Orleans was a World War II battleship that had been converted into a LPH, landing helicopter pad. And so we got on that Navy ship, and we went from San Diego to Hawaii, But in San Diego, I'll tell you a story in San Diego before I left. I was hooked up with a couple of people who were awakening like I was, that what the hell are we doing? We started to understand that the war was being protested and why it was being protested. And we started reading and talking and communicating to each other. And all of a sudden we decided, let's go on Liberty in San Diego. So we rented motorcycles and we got on motorcycles, 2 motorcycles and 3 of us. And we just decided to go into the Baja Desert. And the more miles we went into the Baja Desert, the more we decided to try to support each other in leaving and not going back to the ship, going right on down to Mexico. Well, what happened is we came around. I didn't have anybody on my bike. He had the other guy on his bike, my friend Niall. A car came around at the corner and cut right in front of us as we were coming around the curve. And we went off the road, and they ran right head on into a barn on the side of the road. And his leg was bent out, so you could see that the bone was broken. And the only cars that we'd seen in the last hour was the one that came around the corner.
Gosh.
So and that car didn't stop. So we were out there at the road with a guy with a broken leg and a guy with broken ribs. I had scraped up. I didn't get hurt like them. And finally, we got somebody to call the ambulance, and we were 70 miles out into the desert. And he never went to Vietnam. My friend and I went to Vietnam, and we got punished because somebody figured out that they didn't figure out we were escaping, but they figured out that we were screwing around, and we had to pay for the motorcycles or whatever the hell it was. And then we went to Hawaii. It was our first stop. And we got right off the boat and we rented motorcycles. And we rode around that island at the top as fast as they would go and past police. And we didn't give a shit because every time they stopped and said, do what you want. We're going to be killed anyway. Yeah. Give us a ticket.
What are you going to do? Send us to Vietnam?
Right.
Right.
That was actually said. And the cops didn't give us any tickets. They didn't do anything. They knew that what the hell are we going to do? These guys, probably aren't going to come home.
What was life like on the boat going over?
We were on the front of the boat. They put the Marines in the bow, and we were packed in. So you got 4 bunks going up, and they just packed us in there. So that was really interesting. And but the food was good. Half the guys got sick. We went through a tidal wave. There was a tidal wave when we were out there. Because of the tidal, we were in the middle of the ocean. It wasn't as big as if it were near land, but it was big enough that the 50-foot drop between the bow and the water came over the bow. So it was rocking. And then we saw tornadoes, water tornadoes. It was exciting. I liked the trip across. I also, I started reading, got into the library, and I was reading about the places where we were going. And it was interesting to sort of prepare before we got there. I'd had some idea that how somebody looked at we went past Iwo Jima, fired our weapons as a honoring the World War II veterans. We wound up going to Okinawa, stopped at Okinawa, rented motorcycles, and then eventually we got off the coast of Vietnam.
Where did you land in Vietnam?
It was in the southern part of Vietnam, and we flew off the boat to the place I landed was called was right near Hue, right at the town. The Vietnamese town was Hue. That was right near where we were. Phu Bai is what we called it. It was based at Phu Bai.
What was your impression when you got there?
Well, it was 126 degrees when I got out of the helicopter, and it was all Martian matting. You know what Martian matting is?
No.
interlocking steel that they make runways out of, or platforms for these helicopters to be able to roll across. So it's an instant airfield, and it all hinges together. And so you couldn't possibly touch that because it would burn your hands. And I had gone on the ship, and my best friend that I joined, but he was flown to Vietnam. So I hadn't seen him in a month. So I was looking for him to tell me what the hell's going on here, where. And he talked about the mortar attacks that were happening, the rats that were available. That there was unbelievable. Rats were like the size of cats, huge rats, which were everywhere. As soon as the lights went out, they were, and you turn the lights on, they were under your bed. They were everywhere you could look. There were rats because of whatever they get to eat on the base. So that was Phu Bai, and I was there. Maybe a month before the first one of our helicopters went down, and of course I knew the guy the crew that was killed, but they were shot down. Nobody ever found the remains of it. They weren't rescued. Nobody lived. And so that was when the war started to become more real. And plus, we were being hit by every couple of days mortar shells, and had to run out of where we were sleeping into a bunker. And eventually, Phu Bai, somebody decided that we're going to pull out. Oh, there's another story there. So they were. I think this probably happened right around when we were told that we were moving out of there. The whole base was going to close down. The year before, Tet was right there. That's where it happened, right by where we were. And so they were going to pull out before Tet, get rid of all the helicopters, bring all the men out of there. And I was put on the squad that was going to be left behind. There's like 12 of us that were going to protect an entire base.
Oh, gee.
The night of Tet, I thought, I'm never going to make this. This is not going to happen. And it turned out that we had very little fire. There was very little of anything that happened, thankfully. And they came and took us back down to Marble Mountain where the rest of the squadron went, which is just outside of Da Nang.
How many helicopters were in your squadron that when you were on that base? Oh, okay, so quite a few.
Well, the story I didn't tell you is that the sergeant major comes out, and he's talking about what is the most valuable thing. And there's some misbehavior going on among the ranks. There might be some racism. There's something happening among the ranks. And he's reprimanding us. And he basically said, these helicopters are worth $1 million apiece. I don't want to lose any of them. But I can get men easily. And they don't cost me anything. This is essentially what he says in his rap. And we're all looking, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm not worth a helicopter. No, it's $1 million. I can get a man anytime I want one. So, and that attitude, there were also a lot of Marines at that point that are walking around with peace symbols on, that are beginning to realize that they are not fighting the war they thought they were told they were going to fight, and that the messages from home had sort of leaked in that this is an unjust war, that we're doing things to, dropping napalm, we're killing people that don't deserve to be killed.
If you're talking about that, or that's kind of hush hush, right? If you're talking to other guys about it, because you'd be reprimanded for that.
Oh, yeah. No,
was there ramifications for wearing the peace sign on your stuff, or no?
Well, I had a peace sign, but it was under my shirt. And that's the way most of these guys handled it. I mean, you meet in there's a military law that if there's more than 3 people talking at one time, that's illegal. So, they don't want anybody meeting and talking about this shit. So that immediately set it up. So for the rest of my time in Vietnam, I made sure I was with other people that were talking about it. And that got found out about a few times. that we paid for that. And they worked really hard at dispersing people that were interested in not cooperating.
Tell me about, did you have interactions with locals on that base?
Yeah, there were always, you go into the shower, if there was one, and there's a mama-san in there doing laundry on the water that you're using for the shower. So, and there were hooch people that would come in and sweep the hooch out. So in Phu Bai, there was that. And then the woman is a new mother, and she's walking in there with a little baby, and her job is to clean the hooch. So that was, and if you went to get a haircut, there were Vietnamese that were on the base to get a haircut. So there was interaction with the Vietnamese that were surrounding the bases, and many of them were prostitutes and other people that were trying to live off the black market that was being delivered. I mean, they would give you military money, which you could turn into greenbacks because of prostitution or whatever they were selling. And so there was a whole business going on in the background during this.
Drugs? Did you see a lot of that over there?
I didn't use any drugs over there, but there were drugs. I just figured I'd have to keep everything I got together. I can't be not paying attention. I won't be alive if I fuck around.
What's the actual work like for you? Were you repairing a lot of helicopters? Was that busy, or was that what you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, because there were a lot of bullet holes. People coming back, flying into the LZs. And so there was always things to repair. And I was usually on the night crew because they flew during the day. So if you're on the night crew, that's the primary crew. So you work all night long. And there was plenty to do. Eventually, when I moved to Marble Mountain, which is where my story is at this point, we flew to Marble Mountain, which is just maybe 5 miles from Da Nang. I became a helicopter gunner. But before I did that, I got into trouble because I was on the night crew, and we were doing anything to maintain sanity with each other. So most of the lifers were not on the night crew because they didn't want to be up all night. So they put somebody in charge that was maybe a corporal who was, closely ranked to what we were. And there wasn't the same discipline that was going on. So we would do crazy shit and fuck around in the shop. And so one night I had this guy comes in with his hand all wrapped up in masking tape, showing this around. I said, "Oh, good." I said, "Bring me some masking tape." I asked my friends, 2 friends, I said, "Now I want you to start at my feet, and I want you to wrap me in masking tape all the way up and just leave a slant for my eyes." So they do that, and I'm walking around. We're all laughing. We're having a great time. It's feeling like we're releasing stress. And the guy that's the head of my shop walks in. He's a master shotgun, and he's really pissed. And so, what does he do? He puts me on perimeter guard. So I go to start my 3-month time on the perimeter of the base in a tower with a starlight rifle scope that I can see at night. And I do that for 3 months.
Describe that, the starlight. What is that?
The starlight is a rifle. It's on the M16, but it bolts to the rifle, and you can see in the dark. You can see if somebody's walking through the wire. So I'm right on the beach. It's coming up. And we got a group of men that sleep in a bunker below the tower. You have a steel tower that you climb. And you're standing in the steel tower for 3 hours watching what's going on the shoreline. And there's a barbed wire, razor wire all along the beach. And so you're keeping an eye on that they don't slip in through the wire and then blow up a helicopter, which is worth $1 million. They don't give a shit about people. They want to blow helicopters up, but they'll kill people to get there. And so that's what I was doing. And during that time, the monsoon is going on. So we're sitting in the tower with these incredible storms that are happening. So I come down out of the tower in the morning and I see all of these turtles and all this shit all along the beach. And right off from where we're stationed, there's a hospital ship within sight. You can watch and see it all the time. It's anchored out there in the bay. And there are incredible amounts of medical things all over the beach, dumped off the hospital ship. There are body parts on the beach. And so I'm walking around through this stuff, looking at all of it. And all of a sudden, there is a snake who raises up, and it's this sea snake, which is incredibly poisonous. And it wants to, it wants to strike at me. And so I hit it with my rifle, knock it down, step on it. And then I decided that I'm going to, well, there's a story that comes before this. But I should have told you. So we'll hold it there and I'll come back to it. We'll see if that works. So in order to stay up to date, you have to fire this rifle periodically. And in front of these towers that we sit in, there's claymores, which are these huge things filled with ball bearings. And you get a little button to push. So if anybody's rushing the beach, you can kill several people at once. So before this story about the snake, what happened is that I had to go and fire my rifle, my M16, just so that I was more familiar with it because we're not firing them every night. And so I'm in with a bunch of guys, and maybe there's 7 or 8 of us. And we go down to the beach, and there's a guy, a corporal, who is in charge. And this corporal comes from a bunch of grunts. So we're out there in the deep place where you cut off ears and hang them around your neck. And you kill a lot of people. And he's in charge of the shooting thing. And as we get to the beach, there's a whole flotilla of floating sandpans, which are the Vietnamese people that come to fish right off the shore. And they're within 100, 200 yards of us. And he says, lock and load. And we lock and load. And he makes some kind of call or something on his radio. And he wants to know the distance that they can be how close they can be to the shore. And then he says, okay, we're going to shoot those sampans. And there's children, there's people that have no weapons who are fishing. And he tells us to fire. Each time we unload the clip. And I said, I'm not firing this. I'm not doing it. He says, you better do it. And he threatens me. And so I fire, but I fire right in the sand in front of me. And everybody else, and every 5th round is a tracer round. So you can see these bullets hitting these sandpans. And these people are frantic. And that is when I decided, oh, I'm done. I'm done. I don't give a fuck. So what I did with that snake is because this is a few days before the snake. So I put it in a plastic bag. I figured out where his hooch was. And I went to his hooch and I put it under his pillow. And that's the best I could do at that point. But that story still lives with me. I know I didn't kill anybody. I didn't kill anybody because I wouldn't shoot at them. But what I didn't do is tell everybody. I did say stop shooting. Nobody listened to me. But I should have either shot the guy or I should have done something that was more to stop it. And that's been, that I couldn't find that place to do that in myself.
Did you get written up or anything? Was there no ramifications after that for you?
He didn't do anything because I think maybe he reflected on what he just asked everybody to do. I don't know. But
How long had you been out when that happened? How long had you been over in Vietnam, do you think?
I was probably there about 6, 7 months.
But that was a trigger for you. That was it after that.
Yeah, I got pushed to the inhumane level of stupidity. And the reality is the way we in the air wing looked at grunts, what we call infantry grunts, is that these guys were right in the middle of the worst part of it as they're out there in the jungle doing their shit. So we had a respect for them. But the other reality is when you fly as a helicopter gunner, you are the size of a semi truck flying right above the jungle with everybody in the jungle shooting at you. So, it has its own danger. It's just not as palpable as the grunt.
Okay, back up now. How long did you do guard duty around the base? How long was that?
I was there about 3 months.
Any other stories from that stand out in your mind?
Well, yeah. One day we went to during the day, you got about 6 hours of sleep, and then during the day you had to do something constructive. So we tore down the bunker we were sleeping in. So we tore down all the sandbags. We got rid of all this, took them all apart, and we killed over 250 mice and rats in an 8x8
Oh my
in an eight
gosh.
by eight bunker, and we lined them up. Each one we killed, and when you were trying to sleep, you'd have to make sure you wore what the hell do they call them? The things that there's a blousing elastic, so you bloused your uh, trousers so they couldn't crawl up your leg. But sometimes Marines blouse their trousers anyway. So you blouse your trousers, you would wake up and all the calluses on your fingertips were eaten off.
Oh gosh. Stuff about Vietnam, some pretty gnarly stuff, man. That's
Yeah.
so
So that
so you went from guard duty then to doing door gunner. Did they assign you that or did you choose that?
I chose it because I thought I need to see what this is about. This war is actually about, and see what we're doing.
Is there some training to that? Are you
Not
running
really.
an M16 or is it a mounted like an
No,
M60 or what?
it's an M60 and often napalm. We'd have loads of 55-gallon barrels of napalm. So you'd be flying, and you cannot bring napalm back to the base. So they load it at the base, but you can't bring it back. They won't let you fly back with napalm.
And
So
how is
you
that
go.
mounted? Is that mounted on the helicopter or is
No, the 53 is like the back of a trailer truck. It's a huge open space, and so it's
okay.
stacked in there. Yeah, and it has a fan tail that rolls down. So you just roll stuff out of the fan tail, and then there's up by the uh, cockpit. There's two door gunners right behind the cockpit. Yeah,
And this is the same helicopter you were working on, right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so what was your first mission doing that? You remember?
Well, the first one that I can't forget, and it wasn't the first mission because some of them were just missions of picking up people who'd been shot, stuff that needed to be taken to another place. So if there was a piece of equipment that needed to be moved to a new location, we'd haul that. Sometimes we'd put it on board. Sometimes we'd have it hang below the helicopter. So the one time we had to move a bulldozer. And so we connected the bulldozer at an LZ that was pretty easy to get into. And then we had to carry it from that location to wherever the next place was, which I've forgotten, because the pilot and the crew chief could not gain elevation fast enough. And I'm looking out the door at the mountain that's about 50 feet away from me, the side of a mountain, sheer rock. And I'm listening to these two guys talk. And it sounds like we are not going to be able to get over this ridge. And the pilot is not listening to the crew chief who's saying, pickle the load, pickle the load. And I'm sitting there with the gun in my hand, nothing I can do about anything. And somehow we didn't pickle the load and we came out of it just barely scraping through that.
Mm.
But the franticness of how close that was that on it never left me. I thought, I'm done. We can't survive this. And a bulldozer is a heavy fucking piece of equipment.
Yeah.
and he could, he just couldn't gain elevation. I don't know. One of the ones I remember. We also had uh, missiles that were flying. Russians were supplying certain kinds of missiles that would explode in midair, and I saw missiles going off around us. And I listened to you hear everything that's going on because you're on the sand. They let the gunners know what they want to be in touch with the gunners because they're going to probably have to try to keep them alive.
How often were you firing on a mission?
Not that often. We'd come in, and if there was a hot area, they would tell you where it was, and so that you would be prepared. And they'd often set off flares, or not flares, smoke grenades, to let you know which direction the wind's blowing. And you could gauge from that where there was fire that had come in. But most of these LZs were prepared before we got there. So it wasn't a lot of stuff, but anywhere you flew low, anybody could shoot at you. We obviously take the highest elevation to give us more protection. But when you come in lower, you're a bigger target, easier target.
Were you flying every day?
Probably almost every day during that time I was on there. I think I flew a helicopter for 3 months. I was a gunner for 3 or 4 months. I had 30 missions or something.
And then what happened after that?
I ended that, and I left shortly after I finished that. That was sort of at the end of my tour.
And talk about flying out. What was that day like?
Freedom Bird. We called these. It was at Freedom Hill. Was the place where we flew, where commercial airplanes came in. Airplanes that had hostesses, So I flew in a helicopter from Marble Mountain to Freedom Hill. Me and the other guys that were being discharged that day. And I knew the guy that was the pilot. It was a 46 helicopter, a little bit different, 10 blades. And this guy was a friggin' maniac, the way he flew that thing. So he gave us the ride of our life, and he knew we were going home. So he scared the shit out of us before we got there. The way that he flew that plane. So you get and we got on the plane, and they it's the first time you saw a woman that wasn't Vietnamese. And so that was an exciting thing, hoping that plane won't be shot down when it takes off. Then it wasn't.
Cheers when you get up in the air? What's the mood on there?
There's a good, very positive mood that we're going home, back to the world. It's what we called it, the world.
Where'd you land in the States?
San Francisco, or I think San Diego. It was probably San Diego, but there were protesters. There were people that were screaming shit at us. I didn't expect any of that. I didn't know that's what it's going to be like back at home. So that was difficult.
In San Diego, did you fly back to New York then?
Yeah, as soon as I could. I think I went and got a ticket as soon as I could, and I just stayed in the airport and left.
You ditch your uniform, or did you stay uniform on?
Well, at some point, I think I threw my uniforms out of the helicopter someplace because my tour wasn't over when I got back. I had another year to go. But somewhere along the line, I got rid of everything and just tossed it out. I had to buy it all again. It was just a gesture, a fuck you gesture.
What was it like when you ended up in New York?
Coming home, well, I just basically went to my girlfriend's house and stayed with her as long as I could possibly stay with her, and very little time at home. And we decided during that time that we would get married, and we began to make those plans because one of the reasons that I felt like I was able to hold it together is because I got a lot of care packages that came in Vietnam from her. And she
How often would you get those?
Maybe once every couple of weeks.
Wow.
Which was a lot, actually.
It's a lot, yeah.
So she'd make cookies or send some kind of something to eat and always send letters. And she was going to Newpaltz College, which was literally 3 doors away from where she lived. So she could walk to school and was involved in the protesting that was going on there, knew about what was happening. And her connection was really emotionally important to me to get through this. And so I did deeply appreciate, the sacrifices that she made, trying to stay connected to me.
First time you saw your dad when you were back?
Well, we were glad to see each other. I would say that much. I could tell that he wasn't using the same position that he had with me, that had shifted or faded or disappeared or something. And so I know I slowly developed a friendship somewhat with him because he was aware that I wasn't going to listen to anything he told me to do. And so he had two other sons he could do that with.
You said your joining the Marines was in a way to become a man, right? To stand up to your father. Did you feel like you'd accomplished that after you got back serving in the Marines?
I think if I'm being honest, I would say I probably did feel that to some degree because I was not about taking any shit anymore from anybody. I figured, listen, because when I was there, I said, said to myself, if I survive this, because I never thought I was going to live through this, that wasn't ever going to happen. And when I did, I realized I'd been given a gift of some kind to have my life, and that I was not I needed to do something with it. I didn't have it figured out, but I realized that, yeah, all right, you got through this. What are you going to do with it? And I slowly began to realize I need to get educated. I need to get focused. I fit into the equation of what does every veteran do when they get home? They want to get married. They want to have kids. They want to get a good job. They want to go back into the mainstream. They want to be who they used to be. And I thought that all would work. So I behaved as if it would work. I got married. I had a kid. I went to college. I got a job. I bought a taxi company. I did a number of things that I thought were in line with what I was supposed to do. And it took me years to figure out this was all escape. It was all an escape into something that I don't want to be involved in anymore. I don't want to be told this is what success is. Success is something that takes place inside. It doesn't take place in what you do and where you go and how much money you make or whatever that business is. So I started to wake up to that.
How many years after you got out of Vietnam did that occur?
Well, when I went to college, I couldn't believe what was going on in college. Went to a community college, and there was one other vet in the room with me and people that just graduated high school. And they were literally throwing spitballs in class. And we're looking at this shit, what we've been through, and going, what the hell is going on? What's the matter with these kids? Jesus, they don't have any clue that they could be going to Vietnam. But the teacher there in my English class was a very unusual character. He was a poet, and he had a boa constrictor in his house. And he connected with me and the other guy, and he said, write poetry. He gave us assignments on the side. He says, write about this stuff. And so I started to write poems about what the experience was. And he says, if the lines go horizontal, write diagonally. And that insight was what I attempted to use pretty much the rest of my life. And so I began writing poetry. Nobody would read it, or I never offered it to be read. And I did that for many, many years. And I realized this is the process that I need to go through to figure out what happened, both inside and outside. And I'm still doing that. And I realized that this is what I learned. I have to do something with my life that has meaning. And so eventually I turned all of this into being able to help other people. After I helped myself enough to go through the numbers of different ways of learning how to help people, at some point I wound up meeting a man, I owned a taxi company, and I had been reading lots of different books that had nothing to do with war. They had mostly to do with doing physical. I went to a therapist who did body work and was interested in Alexander Lowe and Wilhelm Reich. There was a bunch of these characters that I got interested in on how they work out with their bodies, what kind of emotion gets buried, how it is in your musculature. And so I started to study this and think about it in terms of education. And I had just finished reading this book about some alternative school in England. And I was talking to somebody about it, and the man comes up to me, says, "I want to hire you for my school." This is his first words out of his mouth. I said, "What are you talking? Who are you, and what are you talking about?" He says, "My name is Peter Pitsley, and I'm opening up a new school up on the mountain called Friends of the Mountain. And I was just listening to what you were saying, and I want to know if you want to come and teach there." And I said, I'm not a teacher. I don't have an education as a teacher. I own this taxi company. That's how I'm making a living. And it turns out from that, he was a Harvard graduate. He had a PhD in English literature. And Peter and I became good friends, and he invited me to the Moreno Institute, which is what his father was running in Newburgh. And at the Moreno Institute, they teach psychodrama. And so I got Merlin, Peter's father, got me connected through the VA to have the VA pay for my training to become a psychodramatist. And so I was working with people from all over the world that would come to do this and stay at this mansion. It literally was a mansion on the Hudson that Moreno owned that was taken over by, it was off, Peter's married Moreno's wife when Moreno died. So he got the mansion. And for a couple of years, I did my own therapy there. I did the therapy around when I told you the story about the sandpans and shooting, which was the first time that I looked at this pain that I was carrying for what I did and didn't do. And I had to accept the reality that I didn't have a lot of choices. I was a young kid. I shouldn't expect as an older man to blame the kid. That was the first major step in moving towards forgiveness, self-forgiveness. And so Peter has remained uh, a tremendously close friend. Why, he's in my life today. He's going to turn 85 in a couple of days. And we went on to do, I worked at the hospital at Four Winds because Peter invited me to come there. I met Sam Klagsburn, who runs the hospital, owns the hospital. He's a Holocaust survivor. His family walked across Europe to escape what was going on. Sam was in World War II working with veterans. He and I became very close friends, and he owned the hospital. And for 25 years, I worked there running groups for veterans and for people that have gone through trauma, and many Holocaust survivors. And that was tremendously healing. Sam was the reason why I went back to Vietnam the second time to study PTSD in the Vietnamese people in 1994. I went into his office and I said, "Sam, can the hospital afford to pay? I can't afford to go on this trip." It was, in Connecticut. It's the name of the VA hospital there. The VA hospital in Connecticut, right next to Yale. This fellow, David Reed Johnson, sends me a thing and says, we want vets and we want to take people back to Vietnam to study PTSD in the Vietnamese people. And so what happens is I went in with this to Sam, and he said, the hospital cannot afford to pay this. Then he pulls his checkbook out, his own checkbook, and he writes me a check for half of it and hands it to me. He got more out of that one move because I then became so dedicated and wedded to that hospital that he ran for him that I helped many, many of his own private patients. When he put them in the hospital, he made sure that they came to my groups. And so we had a fabulous connection there, and he became a secondary father to me, which I'm tremendously grateful.
What did you learn going to Vietnam? What was your
What I
takeaway
learned,
from that?
what I learned going back to Vietnam, I went back there and I wrote a poem, um, asking for forgiveness for what I did in Vietnam. I asked the people, I asked the children, I asked the soldiers, I asked for forgiveness for what I did and what my country did there. And I presented it to um, the highest ranking general in the Vietnam War, General Gao. We had a gathering, and in that gathering, I had the poem translated into English. I mean, from English into Vietnamese. And when we reached the place in the event, it was read by me and by the woman that translated it. And at the end of that, the entire group, which had been alienated from each other during the talk. During the whole talk, they wanted to talk about the Agent Orange that we dumped on the country and how many birth defects came out of it and how many babies in bottles they showed us and all of the shit that was going on around what we did. That the poem that I read brought us together physically. So people were touching, hugging, holding, begging me for the poem. And that was a huge step in what I wanted. Did it clear up what was going on? No. But so the next move I made there that was significant was I was invited. There were only 6 veterans, combat veterans, that went on this trip. Everybody else was a healthcare professional and working with veterans, but not veterans. And so I was invited with these other guys to go out to dinner with another general, and we were having dinner in this remote place that looks like a gas station here. And we're eating food that I never, all kinds of fish on the table, all kinds of food I've never seen. We're eating and drinking beer and talking. And at some point, we get to a place where it's time to chat with each other. We're done eating. And this general, his name is General Depp with a D. And General Depp starts to talk about being in the middle of the Perfume River, which is a river that is a huge river where people live in the river, live on boats in the river. And there's a lot of stuff that takes place on the Perfume River. He's out there making a battle plan to fight us with Ho Chi Minh in a boat. And he tells this story. And they're reading poetry to each other. And so what I do is that I stand up and I take the air crew wings I have for flying the helicopter, which was I valued it the most because I took my life at risk the most. And I gave it to him. I said, I want to give these to you. So he took those. And then I wrote him a poem and sent it to him the next day. There's a speaker that was translating, and I gave it to this guy to give to him about all the tears of the Vietnamese mothers that fell into the Perfume River. And so that was my ask for being seen.
You talked to me about before on the phone a little bit about, I can't even remember what you called it, that soldiers carry around with them. You remember that term?
Moral injury?
Yeah, talk about that.
My friend Peter, who I mentioned, Peter went to Harvard, and in Harvard he met a guy who wrote Achilles in Vietnam. And I was reading this book on vacation with my wife, and he uses the term moral injury. So he is the first place I remember talking to him or reading from this. It's in Peter went to school with this guy, and I'm trying to remember his name while I'm talking to you. I, for some reason, often forget his name, but he was the head of the VA, and he's been acknowledged by God knows how many people, and I'll remember it at some point, and I'll throw it in here. So Peter says, I know him. He and I were friends. I said, really? I'd love to meet this guy. So we go and I meet him. And I tell him, I think that you've discovered the whole issue of it, where we've never put a name on it. You put the first name on it, moral injury. That's what Vietnam vets are dealing with because we've done immoral things for what we thought were moral reasons. And then if it isn't seen by everybody as a moral thing that you're doing, it becomes really difficult to own it. You're killing people who don't need to be killed. And for me, it was dumping napalm out of a friggin' helicopter onto villages because we might as well at least hit a village instead of just dumping it in the jungle. And I had no say about where they were going to dump it. But I'm watching these barrels fall to the earth and explode around villages where people have and this went on all the time. So I've been working and talking about moral injury. I just did a talking for people in Israel right now. There's a suicide epidemic in Israel. There's just a lot of stuff going on where soldiers don't know how to manage things they're told to do morally. And so it is, we call PTSD being the culprit, that why there's so much veteran suicide. I don't believe that at all. My belief is that it's got nothing to do with somebody trying to kill you. It has everything to do with you trying to kill somebody else that doesn't deserve to be killed. This is where PTSD is. This is where moral injury occurs, when there is no rational way to explain it other than you've been told to do it, and then your men are going to get killed or they're going to get killed, or whatever dynamic is going on in the craziness of war. And if we look at this and own this as a country, as a military, then that becomes very hard to enlist people to take to offer their lives. And the more we do modern warfare with drones and every other way, just to be remote as you can, the guy that presses that button on the computer and it kills 10 people in a flash on the other 5,000 miles away, that guy eventually wakes up at night and goes, oh, fuck, what did I do? Just because it's a flash and you can't see it. I went to Alaska and I went to Alaska to, I don't know what the hell I was there for, but I wound up going there. Oh, there was a young man that I was working with that's a social worker, and he invited me to come to Alaska and look at PTSD and alcoholism with Eskimo people. So I'm in a remote place in Nome, and he tells me, I got a friend who's a Vietnam vet. He lives way out on an island. I can get a plane to take you there. So I get to this guy's house. I get off the plane. I get walked up to the house, and it's a tiny little island with hardly any houses on it. There's a couple of boats. And I go to his front porch, and there's animals hanging down the hip and furs and things. I go in there, and he's an Eskimo, thoroughbred Eskimo, and he was in Vietnam. And he and I start talking about Vietnam. And he says, I was on a remote island that we never got bombed, we never got hit, we never got anything. But the remote island was set up as an installation that it tracked every maneuver that went on in the sky. And he was in tears telling me how many people that he facilitated killing by just maintaining these pieces of equipment. And that registered for me that he had enough emotional awareness and sensitivity to have understood that was the reality, and he was suffering with it. And he was just so delighted I was listening to him and sharing my own story with him. So that's it isn't how far you can get away from this thing. It's whether you initiated something by facilitating, pushing the button that killed the drone that kills the people, or whatever it is nowadays. So it's complicated. Of course we need the military. Of course we need to protect ourselves. Of course we've got people in the world that want to kill us. All of this is real, but we're not. We've as a culture, we seem to have escaped not looking at what the consequences are for those that are left behind that do this.
What's the that you can offer for someone? What's some advice to help out of that place, at least to come to grips with it, I guess, for a person.
Well, it's easier to have advice for the veteran. It is not easier to have advice for the civilian because I don't know exactly why civilians can't understand this. In fact, I'm writing a book hoping that civilians will look at this issue. But we have so many ways that we escape. Uh, we and everything we watch on television is basically murder. So the only thing that penetrates people is murder to get their attention, to hold them in the grips of things, particularly the way the media is now, or at least the entertainment that I watch. If there isn't the murder in the first 15 minutes, then it's probably not going to be
Yeah.
something that stays on TV.
Yeah.
So I think we've got such an emotional callous and such a lack of access to our morality. I think it's there. I don't think it disappeared. I don't think that, I think it's hidden deep in the musculature and in the body. And if we listen to the body more, this is what I'm interested in today. What is my body telling me? What am I holding back? Sitting still enough to get the message that I need to say something to somebody or touch somebody or say that I care or something. Or if I don't like what's going on, to speak up.
Is it fair to say that you've found some healing through listening and helping other veterans and other people?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And the hospital situation is you don't get into the hospital. You don't get the health care to pay anything unless you want to kill yourself or kill somebody else. They don't pay. Or you're psychotic. So anybody in between there most likely is not going to be able to get the help they need. And when you get in there, the help you need might be what I talked about. The best treatment for moral injury is presence. Presence meaning somebody being present to have you tell the story and listen and take it in and acknowledge in a significant enough way that you feel like they listened. That's a presence. And of all the things that I'm aware of, that, and eventually, if you do that, then you'll hear more. You'll become present to more and more of it if you show and behave that you are present to what is being said. It's not an easy thing to be present, particularly when people are talking about difficult things. And this is one of the benefits I got by going through a lot of shit in my own life, that I could listen and I understand that you want to kill yourself. And I can understand why that this is so difficult. So let's just talk about what you're doing with the rage. Who do you want to find you when you finish killing yourself? And let's now have a conversation with that person. And before that happens, what is you telling them? What is it that you're telling? Why did you do it in the VA parking lot? You know, that this is the kind of, you have to listen in such a way that you're willing to take that in, work with it, and stand still and have all the body movements and have your ears open and have that all being convincing that you're there. And it's very easy to escape. I don't know if that makes
Advice for people who are trying to get through this. What would you say to them? What's a good outlet for them?
I think creativity has a place in the field of psychodrama. Moreno was able to discover that spontaneity is the most powerful, and creativity are the most powerful medications you can get involved with. And the level of someone's spontaneity is the level of their health. It's reflected. Creativity, which I have been involved in creativity as soon as I could. I did many things that are creative. I got woodworking. I got a whole, if you can't see it behind me, but over there's a wall of walking sticks and talking sticks and things that I've made that have all kinds of involved things. There's sculptures all along my entire backyard. I am building, making things for people, for myself, just to look at. I'm not making a living at any of this. I'm writing poetry. I'm writing a book. I'm interacting in 4 different men's groups. I do a lot of stuff that has to do with being creative with other people. I'm probably You probably understand this yourself because you're involved in a creative process. What we're doing right now is creative. What we're doing right now is you're being present to me. Tell the story. This is helping me.
Found the veterans who I think are doing better in that sense are people who have a creative outlet, for sure. It's a release valve, right? It's a place to put those energies, no matter what that creativity is, painting,
Yeah.
acting, singing, whatever. I I want to go back just a little bit. I want you to describe Marble Mountain to me.
Marble Mountain is right on the coast. So when you look at Marble Mountain, you will see the ocean to one side of it or behind it. Uh, it is a pretty steep uh, ge- mountain. It's not very, you wouldn't probably call it a mountain. This is like this stone that sticks out of the earth. But at the top of that mountain, there is a cave that you walk in. And when I went and visited it on my return trip, there is a female Buddha that is the size, it's probably 30 feet high, 20 feet wide,
Wow.
carved right into the inside of the mountain, a female Buddha. And there is a whole labyrinth of things inside that mountain that when I was there in Vietnam for the first time, there were regiments of Viet Cong in that mountain that took it over and were using it as protection. And they were using it because we were not allowed to bomb that sacred place.
Was your base just below it? Is that where it was?
Exactly. Every time we took off with the
Wow.
helicopter, we had to fly over. And when I say a
Wow.
mountain, it's really not a mountain. It's I don't know what you call it, something that is 300, 400 feet high, but
It stuck out. It stood up tall,
straight.
unusual.
Yeah, no question. And it was at the end of the runway. So depending on which way the wind's blowing, you either took off and flew over or you went away from it to take off. When I went back there the second time, I got the female Buddha, and they were selling them at the bottom of the mountain, so I have that.
Man, everyone's story of going to war, the reasons, their experiences based on their personality and the time and who you're with, and it's so complicated. What's your takeaway from all of it now? I mean, how old are you, by the way, Larry? How old are you?
Yesterday, I turned 78.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you.
Reflecting, what's your takeaway from all that now? The war, your experiences there?
I think it put me on a track that if I looked at it at the time, I was uncomfortable because I was trying to sort things out. What it was to become a man, what it was to be a father. As I struggled being the father, I had a son. And as I look back, I think it set me up to be fortunate enough to actually see a lot of things in life that most people don't see because they aren't either put in those circumstances or they haven't had to navigate what the consequences of those circumstances are, which is to internally go inside and figure out what is going on with me. How am I going to survive this? How am I going to figure out a way to leave this earth that I feel like I completed something that I was brought here to do. And I'm closer to that than I've ever been. And it has to do with who I've attracted that's in that same place, friends and people. And I feel grateful that this is the track that I've been able to navigate. And writing this book this is sort of the swan song. One of the things about that term swan song, McNamara wrote a book before he passed about how many how he regrets what he basically did, sending 58,000 men and women to Vietnam. And I don't think that I don't think that worked for him. Uh, I'm writing a book that is talking about my own journey through that process, and I can feel it's working. I don't if it sells 3 copies, it's fine, because it is I found my voice in the process of creating that book, and I think it's a voice that other people, if they're willing and interested enough, will find their voice. It's not about, figuring me out. It's about the process that I use to figure me out. I'm grateful. I truly am. I'm grateful, and I love my wife. The book is dedicated to her. I love many of the friends that I have, and I could say it openly, and I feel fortunate. I honestly do. And I didn't think I'd be in this place for most of that time, but it gradually,
Think that can be looked on as success at the highest level, right? And wealth. Wealth really isn't money. It's just where you land with the people in your life, I think, more than anything.
yeah, yeah, no, it's good. I like having this opportunity to chat with you.
Well, thank you
Maybe.
so much. Thanks for being honest and open and for honestly all of your help of thinking that through and trying to help other men that and women who went through that same thing. I don't I don't think people understand the cost.
I think if you want to understand it, it isn't. When I go to do a talk or something, I'll say to people, "How many people in the room are related to a veteran? How many people in the room know a veteran or work with a veteran?" And pretty much by the time I'm done with that, there's almost nobody that doesn't know a veteran. And so it's in your family. It's
Yeah.
in the places that you work. It's everywhere. And if you pay any attention to that, you could actually, ask that person,
Yeah.
"How
Yeah.
you doing?" And because it isn't that remote. It may be getting
No.
more remote now that we do remote killing, but, one
Well,
person can kill
and
endless amounts.
and the effects of it reverberate through kids and marriages and work, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
it's a cost. And
Well, there's a new law out. I've been writing about this lately that they're trying to get the veterans that use CPAPs, which I do, veterans that have tinnitus, which is a ringing in your ears. They're going to stop providing treatment for that.
mm,
I worked on helicopter. I had lost hearing. I have to wear hearing
yeah,
aids
yeah,
because I worked on jet things, because I fired a gun, because I was constantly working around jet aircraft for 4 years, and now you wanna
yeah,
take away. Yeah. I breathed so much shit from the burn pit in Vietnam.
yeah,
We had it right below Marble Mountain. It was a burn pit, and it was probably 100, 200 feet around, circled. Military things, plastics, anything that we couldn't use or didn't have a place to go. They burned it every night, and they covered it with kerosene. And then you had blankets, you had all kinds of shit that was being burned, and it was surrounded with Vietnamese people who were waiting and there's men with guns. And so they dumped the gasoline, kerosene, whatever they were burning it with, all over it. And then they torch it, and as soon as it got torched, hundreds of Vietnamese people are running into the fire to get something out of it while they're shooting over their heads. And that burn pit just gave off incredible gas that just drifted all over the base. Yeah.
it's honestly, of all the veterans that I've talked to, very few haven't had injuries from accidents, chemical stuff. You see physical costs associated with that, even if it's only they were in for a year or two. It's crazy. It's crazy. Well, Larry, thank you so much. What a pleasure. What an honor to hear your story And I read your first book, which was a fantastic read, and I'm excited to read your second book.